Okay, let's dive right in. Is masculinity inherently toxic? Or is that just what we call the kind of strengths we're maybe afraid we'll need someday?
That's a powerful start. It really is.
Think about it for a moment. When you hear masculine, what's the very first image that pops into your mind?
Yeah, what is it?
Is it someone offering protection? Or
Yeah.
someone, posing a threat?
Caring father, maybe?
Or clenched fist? It's not just words, right? It's about these fundamental perceptions we have.
And what's fascinating is how, well, context can completely shift those images.
How so?
Well, imagine some kind of sudden global crisis. Survival depends on, let's say, traditionally masculine traits, physical strength, stoic resolve.
Okay.
Would we still label those things toxic? Or would they suddenly seem, I don't know, heroic, necessary?
Right. So the toxicity isn't inherent, maybe. It depends on the situation.
It suggests our view is pretty fluid, yeah.
Okay.
Heavily context dependent, based on what we feel we need in that moment.
Which brings up that sort of personal whiplash, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, many guys grew up being told, be strong, be stoic.
The classic message, keep it in.
Exactly. And then, suddenly, that same stoicism is the problem. It's emotional unavailability.
Mm-hmm. The
Yeah.
script completely flips.
It feels like you're constantly walking this tightrope. Have you
Yeah.
ever felt that? That kind of push and pull, trying to figure out who you're even trying to please anymore.
Oh, absolutely. And that feeling points to this core paradox we see in society.
Which is,
Well, we say we want men who are sensitive, emotionally available, right?
yeah, that's the message.
But then there's often this surprise, maybe even a bit of disappointment when men actually struggle without those clear traditional roles to fall back on.
Huh. Like, we want the sensitivity, but maybe still instinctively look for the traditional strength in a crisis.
Exactly. It's like we want both, maybe without realizing they can sometimes be in conflict. It creates this damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario.
So can a man be both? Strong and sensitive,
Yeah.
assertive and empathetic?
Or are we just setting men up to feel like they're always failing? Maybe the definitions we're using are just too narrow, too restrictive.
And you see the real-world impact. It's not just theory.
No, definitely not.
It's the guy hesitating to cry at a funeral because he's worried about looking weak.
Mm-hmm. That fear of judgment.
Or, online algorithms picking up on young men searching for answers, for identity.
And feeding them more and more extreme stuff. Because at least that stuff offers a solid-seeming framework, right? Even if it's, well, warped.
It really makes you pause and ask, are we targeting toxic masculinity, or has it somehow become just masculinity itself?
And if we take that wider view, what happens when we basically tell boys that everything about being a boy, their natural inclinations, is somehow wrong? What's the outcome?
Yeah, what does happen?
Do they magically become these perfectly adjusted people, or do they just get lost, sort of grasping for anything that gives them a sense of identity in that vacuum? It leads to this really deep ethical question. What positive vision of manhood are we actually offering? If the main message feels like condemnation, what are the consequences down the line?
I remember seeing this comment. It really stuck with me. A parent said their 7-year-old son asked them really anxiously, is it okay to be a boy?
Wow, 7 years old.
Yeah. Think about the weight of that. What kind of cultural vibe are we putting out there that a child absorbs that level of self-doubt about who they are?
It forces you to wonder if we've maybe overcorrected. Trying to fix past problems, but maybe creating new ones, tilting the boat too far.
So it brings us back to really looking inward, doesn't it?
Definitely. A Socratic challenge, almost.
Are you really against toxic masculinity, the harmful behaviors, the rigid stereotypes we agree are bad?
Right. The aggression, the suppression of emotion that hurts people.
Or is the discomfort actually deeper? Is it with masculine power itself? Even when it's protective, when it's about perseverance?
That's the uncomfortable question. What's your gut reaction when you see a man confidently assert himself? Is it admiration? Or is it suspicion?
Oof. Yeah. That reveals a lot about our own biases, doesn't it?
It really can.
You hear phrases like, the future is female. And equality is crucial, obviously. But what if a genuinely thriving future needs both empowered, feminine strength and a healthy, well-defined masculinity?
Not one trying to dominate, but also not one that's just subservient or hollowed out, just whole.
Could it be that in tearing down the old, necessary work, we've accidentally thrown out something vital about the masculine spirit itself?
It's interesting if you look back historically. Think about masculine archetypes. The warrior, the king, the builder.
Right.
Their power wasn't just defined as power over others. Often it was the power to do things, to create, protect, lead, provide.
So when did all power, especially male power, become so inherently suspect in our eyes?
That's a huge question. And what's the cost of that suspicion? Does it lead to a kind of societal stagnation if the power to act is constantly viewed with mistrust?
Okay, let's make this personal for the listener. Take a second. Think of a man you really admire. Could be anyone, family, friend, public figure.
Mm-hmm. Got someone.
Now, what masculine traits do they have that make you admire them? Are those traits toxic?
Or are they actually part of their strength, part of their goodness?
It forces you to see the complexity, right? There's strength in kindness or assertiveness and empathy. They're not always opposites.
They can coexist. Which brings us to another potentially uncomfortable reflection.
Aeon?
The whole mansplaining thing. Obviously, genuine condescension is bad. We know that.
Of course.
But how much of the time is the critique really about that patronizing behavior? And how much might just be discomfort with a man confidently sharing knowledge, even if he's right?
That's a tricky line.
It's a very subtle distinction. Are we reacting to arrogance or just confidence? And are we applying that standard fairly?
Okay, let's pose a stark choice, a bit of a thought experiment.
Yeah.
Would you rather have men so, quote-unquote, non-toxic that they're passive when faced with injustice, hesitant to step up, even to protect others, versus men who still possess a controlled aggression, maybe, a capacity for righteous anger, a willingness to face danger to defend the vulnerable?
Like the firefighters on 9/11.
Exactly. Overwhelmingly men running towards the danger. Was that toxic? Or was that a type of masculine courage society desperately needed right then?
It really makes you think about what we risk losing if we demonize the entire spectrum of masculine traits. We have to be careful what we wish away.
And watching the debates around this, especially online, it's interesting.
How so?
You see some people genuinely trying to understand, looking for common ground, constructive dialogue.
And others.
Others just seem to want to win, to be right, to score points.
Yeah, you see that. It becomes about validating their own stance.
So which approach tells us more about where we are right now? The search for understanding or the drive to just win the argument?
That drive to win often shuts down the conversation, doesn't it? Prevents real insight.
Okay, let's try some rapid-fire questions. Just get reaction. Does society need men to be strong in various ways? Yes or no?
In certain ways, yes. I'd have to say yes.
Do we rely on men sometimes to be providers, emotionally, materially?
For some people, absolutely, yes.
Do we need men at times to be protectors, physically or otherwise?
Sometimes, yes, definitely.
So why is it so hard to just say these things without immediately adding like a dozen caveats and disclaimers?
It's like we're afraid of the words themselves, isn't it? Afraid of sounding old-fashioned or endorsing stereotypes, even if those archetypes held some truth or value.
Which might create this internal conflict for a lot of people.
What do you mean?
You can believe fiercely in equality, everyone having the same worth, same potential.
Right. Absolutely fundamental.
And also recognize that, well, there are differences, some biological, some cultural, and that some of those differences, including traditionally masculine ones, might actually be valuable, even essential sometimes.
Can you hold both ideas at once? Equality and difference, without feeling that cognitive dissonance.
That's the challenge, isn't it? Can we value equality and specific masculine contributions?
It requires nuance, which seems hard to come by these days.
I heard from a therapist friend recently. She sees so many young men feeling completely lost.
The drift. Yeah, I've heard similar things.
They're told their ambition is toxic, their assertiveness is oppression, even just being quiet is somehow wrong, it's complicity.
So they don't know what to be.
Exactly. They lack a positive, achievable vision of manhood. So what are we offering them instead? Just criticism, vague advice to be yourself while telling them everything about themselves is wrong.
And sometimes, let's be honest, the label toxic masculinity gets slapped onto things that are just human flaws, not exclusive to men at all.
Like what?
Immaturity, insecurity, being selfish or cruel. These aren't male-only traits, are they?
Definitely not.
So if we only blame masculinity, we kind of let everyone else off the hook, don't we? And we don't get to the root of those behaviors, which might be about something else entirely.
Look at the online discussion. It feels so polarized.
Oh, totally.
You got the caricature of the alpha bro on one side
That loud and aggressive.
and the beta simp on the other, overly apologetic almost.
Desperate for approval.
Where's the middle ground?
Yeah.
Where's the picture of just solid, mature, balanced masculinity. It feels like it's missing from the conversation.
It's like the whole spectrum got flattened into these two ridiculous extremes.
Okay, time for some real honesty, maybe for the listener too. Haven't you at some point benefited from a man exhibiting a traditionally masculine trait?
Hey.
Maybe physical strength when you needed help moving something heavy,
Mm-hmm.
or someone taking charge in an emergency, or just, the reliability of a provider.
Probably. Most people likely have, if they're honest.
But would you feel comfortable admitting that publicly today? Is there a sort of shame or hypocrisy around acknowledging we might still need or value those things?
That's a really interesting point. Do we feel guilty for having those needs?
Think about, say, a father working himself to the bone at tough jobs. Maybe he wasn't emotionally available because he was just exhausted from providing.
Right. Focused on survival, on giving his family a better life.
Was that toxic provider syndrome? Or was it just love, expressed through sacrifice and hard work?
Simple labels often miss the complexity, don't they? The why behind the action.
Let's flip the script for a second. Imagine if traditionally feminine traits got the same treatment.
Okay?
What if empathy was called toxic passivity? Or nurturing was emotional excess? Collaboration was weakness?
Would we accept that? Would society frame women's core traits so negatively?
Probably not. So why is the conversation so different for men? It highlights a potential double standard, doesn't it?
It certainly suggests the lens we use to view masculinity is uniquely critical right now.
And, we tell men, be vulnerable, open up.
Right, share your feelings.
But then, when they do, how do people actually react? Is it always supportive? Or is there sometimes a bit of recoil, discomfort seeing that fragility?
Mm-hmm. And at the same time, pop culture still kind of romanticizes the aloof bad boy, right?
Entirely.
Yeah.
So we say we want sensitive guys, but maybe we're still drawn to something else. Is the confusion just in men? Or is it also in our own mixed signals?
That's a really important question. Are we sending contradictory messages about what we find attractive versus what we say we value?
It's worth considering the historical reality for most men, too.
Go on.
They weren't kings or famous warriors. They were laborers, farmers, soldiers, enduring really harsh conditions, doing whatever was needed to survive.
Just getting through the day often.
Are we judging their masculinity, their way of being, by our modern, relatively safe standards, without really grasping the pressures they were under?
That's a fair point. Historical context matters.
Okay, here's maybe a challenging twist.
Let's hear it.
What if toxic masculinity isn't always the root problem? What if sometimes it's a scapegoat?
A scapegoat for what?
For bigger systemic issues, for individual flaws that aren't gender-specific, for the simple, uncomfortable fact that life can be brutal and someone has to do the tough stuff.
So instead of fixing men, we should focus on fixing the conditions that breed negativity in everyone.
Maybe it's part of the picture, shifting the focus a bit. Does that resonate at all?
It does make you think. Are we over-attributing problems to gender when the causes might be broader or more complex?
And consider this. The very drive and ambition we admire in successful men,
Yeah.
and the aggression or dominance we condemn in others, could they be like two sides of the same coin? Same underlying energy.
And what determines which side shows up is context, character, culture.
Right. Ambition can build schools or concentration camps, as the saying sort of goes. The drive itself isn't inherently good or bad, it's how it's channeled.
So maybe the focus shouldn't be on eliminating the drive, but on guiding it.
Exactly. Now, take a moment, just pause. Do you still see masculinity as this single monolithic thing, usually a problem?
Or is it more like a huge spectrum, a rainbow of possibilities? And maybe we've only been shown the black and white, the extremes.
And if that's true, who benefits from keeping our understanding so limited, so polarized?
That leads to a really crucial point, I think.
What's that?
Maybe the most dangerous masculinity isn't the loud, obvious kind. Maybe it's the kind that's been shamed so much, stripped of any positive affirmation, that it feels hollowed out, like it has nothing worthwhile left to offer.
It's sort of vacuum?
Yeah. When a man loses that sense of masculine value or purpose within a masculine framework, what fills that void? What does he become then? That feels potentially more unstable, more unpredictable.
So back to where we started. Toxic. Or needed strength. Your hesitation, maybe the listener's hesitation. It says a lot, doesn't it?
It really does. We need to be more honest, perhaps, about what we actually value, not just what we feel we should value publicly. Sometimes there's a gap.
Definitely a gap.
And if this conversation has made you feel uncomfortable or made you question things, I'd say lean into that. Share it with someone you can have a real discussion with, beyond just the easy slogans.
Because this isn't just talk, is it? It's about how we see half the population,
Okay.
how we want men to show up in the world.
Right, and maybe those drives achievement, competition, assertiveness, maybe they're not just things to be suppressed. Maybe they're deep human impulses that need guidance, channeling towards good.
Are we focusing too much on deletion, not enough on redirection?
It's a possibility. Which leads to another tough question. What's riskier long term? A man embodying a flawed version of traditional masculinity with some problems. Or a man with no real sense of masculine identity at all, just adrift, confused by all the contradictory messages. Which situation is potentially worse for him and for society?
We talk about masculinity like it's bad code we need to fix, but what if it's more like a core part of the operating system?
And trying to delete it destabilizes everything else.
Could be. Imagine telling a little boy his energy, his strength, his protective feelings are just wrong. What does that do to his developing sense of self?
What kind of soul does that build? It's a heavy thought.
So take stock again. The men in your life, father, brother, partner, friends, how many of their masculine traits are genuinely harmful?
Versus just different. Different from how you are or how you think they should be. Sometimes we label difference as toxicity because it makes us uncomfortable.
And what about soft men? When a man is gentle, vulnerable, do we truly respect that as strength? Or deep down, is there sometimes a perception of weakness, someone easier to manage?
Our unconscious biases run deep there. It's worth examining.
That veteran story. In combat, you need men who run towards the fire. Back home, they tell those same men their fire is the problem.
How do you reconcile that? The need for those traits in some situations, the condemnation in others. Can someone just switch that on and off?
It seems incredibly difficult. And what are the costs if we devalue masculinity across the board?
Fewer protectors, less innovation maybe, more confusion, resentment. Are we thinking about those potential consequences?
And this idea that men don't feel the pressure. Maybe they do. Maybe they just don't feel safe saying they do.
Because vulnerability gets weaponized in these debates, so stoicism becomes self-protection.
Right. So is bad behavior intrinsically male? Or is it just human failing wearing a male face sometimes? We have to separate the action from the identity.
Absolutely. And who gets to define healthy masculinity anyway? Should it be defined for men or with men? In a conversation that doesn't start with accusation.
Because if the goalposts keep moving based on who's shouting loudest, how can anyone build a stable sense of self?
I have to admit, I've had my own journey with this. I used to have a much simpler view.
How so?
I definitely misinterpreted confidence as arrogance sometimes, or saw quietness as indifference. I had my own biases based on the narratives out there. It took effort to see past them.
Jung had that quote, right, about a tree needing roots in hell to reach heaven.
Yeah, implying that wholeness requires acknowledging the darker potential, not denying it. Maybe healthy masculinity needs that too. Understand the potential for aggression, to channel it, not pretend it doesn't exist.
Because if men fear their own strength, they might suppress it. And suppressed energy rarely goes away cleanly, does it?
It often comes out sideways. Resentment, passive aggression, things that are arguably harder to deal with.
Think about a guy you know who seems shut down. Could it be partly a fear that expressing himself in a typically masculine way will just lead to criticism?
It's a possibility, a kind of learned helplessness, almost.
And we have to remember, there's no one good masculinity, right? It's cultural. It's contextual.
Trying to impose one single definition worldwide is a kind of imperialism, really. It ignores different needs, different histories.
So are men the problem? Or is the impossible contradictory script we hand them the problem?
It feels like we blame the actor when the play itself is flawed.
And what's the choice for men then? Conform, lose part of yourself, or be authentic and risk being ostracized?
That's a brutal choice.
And shaming people rarely leads to positive change, does it? It shuts them down.
If we want healthier masculinity, it probably needs to come from invitation, encouragement, not just constant critique.
Let me ask you this personally. If you had a son and he grew up traditionally masculine, strong, protective, responsible, maybe a bit stoic, but he was also kind, ethical, good, would you be secretly disappointed?
That's a powerful question. My honest answer, no, I'd be incredibly proud. Which probably says something about my deeper beliefs beyond the current discourse.
Right, and when positive masculinity gets mocked, And we stay silent.
We're implicitly endorsing the idea that it's all suspect. Silence isn't neutral.
How will future generations look back on this time, this intense focus on gender? Will they see progress or confusion, maybe even harm?
We're writing that history now with how we talk about this.
Maybe healthy masculinity isn't a destination, not a perfect state.
Maybe it's just the ongoing journey, grappling with power, flaws, vulnerability, finding a way to contribute positively, an evolution.
Yeah. I've definitely had moments where I realized I judged too quickly based on those prevailing narratives. Owning that is part of the process.
And recognizing this is a shared burden, right? Redefining roles involves everyone. But the conversation about masculinity has often felt very one-sided. That needs to change for genuine progress.
So back to the start one last time. Toxic. Needed strength.
It's complex. It can be both. It depends on the man, the situation, and crucially on how we interpret it. That interpretation has real power.
Masculinity isn't a pathology to be cured. It's a potential to be harnessed. For good or for ill. The choice isn't solely his. It's ours in how we help shape him.
Well said. And if listening to this stirred something, maybe listen again. Often the most uncomfortable parts are the most important ones.
Yeah. And maybe share this. Not to attack anyone, but to start a real conversation with a man in your life. Beyond the buzzwords, beyond the blame.
Because ultimately, this isn't just about defining masculinity. It's about asking ourselves why we believe what we do and deciding what kind of men we truly want and perhaps need in the world alongside us. This has been The Deep Dive.